Hey everyone, this is Brian. I'm the one who sent out the email about the timeline tool, and which has been getting some decent feedback from everyone, which I truly appreciate. Um, the first few of you that emailed me back expressing interest, I tried to explain in words kind of how to get everything set up and how to get it running and how to use the tool, and quickly realized that this was not the most efficient way in which to do this. Um, in writing everything down, it kind of sounded um, confusing or complicated to get set up, which isn't the case, but I thought that a video tutorial might be best. So in order to use the tool, we need two things. One is R, which is just an open source, completely free program that we need to download, and then the other is my tool. So in order to get R, we go ahead and just go to the internet, and you would want to go to the CRAN website and download from there. Now, unfortunately, I run a Windows operating system, and so uh, I can't actually do a verbatim walkthrough for you because I'm on a Mac, and presumably all of you are on Windows. So what I've done is instead, here is a YouTube video. You can either type in this URL completely or just search for Install R for Windows by Roger Peng and use this tutorial. It's a very in-depth tutorial, kind of walks through everything perfectly. One thing to note, however, is because this is an issue in my office, IT may have blocked your ability to save files to the program files directory. If that's the case, because that's the default directory that R tries to save to, just feel free to save R anywhere. Anywhere like on your C drive or whatever else, just wherever you want to put it. And all we really need is to be able to find R either through the start menu or on our desktop or whatever else. But once you have R installed and you find it, you should be able to open R, and it should look like this. All of this here, not really important. It's just the starting text. You know, R is free, comes with no warranty, etc., etc. But this is kind of where the tool will always be launched from. So before we can start that, we will need to do install.packages. And what this does is gives us third-party, you can just consider them plugins. What this will do is give us some of the functionality that the tool relies on that doesn't come in base R. So for that we need Shiny, this, this, and this. So once we do this, it will ask us to select a CRAN mirror. A CRAN mirror is simply a server that's close to you so that you can get the fastest kind of download speeds possible. For all of you, just choose cloud. It's actually the closest to all of us, regardless of where you are, and that's going to be our fastest option. So then we just hit OK, and it will go through and now begin to download all of the packages that we need. Unfortunately, the screen recorder doesn't have a pause, so as this is running, as you're watching the video, feel free to just skip all of this part, and then we'll pick up once this is done, and it's now done. So now that all of that is loaded, now we need to go and get our tool. So we go back to the internet, and we go to a website called GitHub, and again, here's the URL that you want to go to. GitHub is just a website that hosts code for people like me that develop tools or other type of analytical analyses, things like that. Here, it's for a tool, and so we'll want to download the zip. Go ahead and just click that. That will be moved into wherever your downloads go, so presumably like a download folder, and it'll be called timeline JSR-master. So we're going to want to copy this. So, copy that, and then choose where we want to save it to. So I'm going to go here and go projects R, and here you can see I've already saved this from when I originally downloaded it. So once you've pasted it, you want to go in and look around and make sure that it looks right. You should have these 4 files, which are mandatory, and then this folder called www. And if we look in there, you will find that you have a CSS and a JS folder. You should create this files folder. So, make a new folder and then just call it files. I've already got mine in there, so we'll just delete this. but you should have these 3 folders inside of your www folder. So once you have that, we can just go back to R, and we are going to run our tool. So it's just shiny, 2 colons, run app, and here we are going to go to the timeline master and put a comma and type in launch.browser equals true. So you'll want it to look exactly like this, except your file path here might be different. So whatever you saved, right, like this might be C users some person slash timeline JS R master, or whatever the case may be for your directory, just wherever you saved that to. And you want it to be the folder that holds those 4 files that I showed you along with the www folder. So here, and we'll go there. And launch.browser equals true. And that should now open in whatever your default browser is. Now, one of the things I will say is that this tool runs better in the newer browsers. So Chrome, Firefox, Safari. I would actually recommend sticking to Firefox. It's the one that I prefer. The second best is Chrome. Safari has an issue, which I'm going to show you in just a second. And Internet Explorer is just laden with issues. It's not a very good program to develop a web-based tool. So if you can avoid using Internet Explorer, please do. If not, and you experience some errors, go ahead and just let me know. So this is what the tool looks like when you first open it up. It has this default title, just Timeline.js, and this default text that mentions Northwestern University Knight Labs, as they're the ones who developed the underlying timeline in this tool. So even down at the bottom, I give credit to them as well. As a programmer, I'm very much all about giving credit where it's due. So shout outs to Northwestern University Knight Labs, as this is primarily their work. And then this is just an example event. So we will come back to this in just a second. Let's look at what a timeline actually looks like. And that has timed out, so let's refresh. The timing out will not be an issue for you. This is just because it's being hosted on a server of mine. So everything loads up. You see that we've changed our the title of our timeline. We've changed the text down here, and we now have more events. So one of the things, actually we'll get to that. I'm sure we'll find an error. So what is the tool? As I mentioned, it's developed by Northwestern University and is essentially an aesthetically pleasing timeline meant to help you embed media content that's crucial to your case that you're trying to map out. So let's see what that might look like. Say, for example, you need to plot points in Google Maps. Maybe this is a business of interest or the last place that your suspect was seen. And you can see it is fully interactive. We can click and drag. We can bring up information about our point here. Zoom out, get the 3D or go back, and we can also view the larger map, which will open up in a new tab. So that's pretty nice. Next, YouTube videos. We can go ahead and actually just play the video.
ISIS has released a new video.
And that all plays. You can see that the settings that you would normally find on YouTube are there. And if we want to view this in a bigger screen, just right click and we can get the video URL and now open up a new tab and paste that URL. And that will allow us to see it in a bigger screen. Next, we have Twitter. I don't know how often this would be used in crime analysis, but in intelligence analysis, where I work, primarily with like terrorist financing, we are often looking at the tweets that are used by ISIS for propaganda and recruitment. So being able to embed tweets of things that take place is very nice. And you can see we can follow any links that are included in the tweet. We can go and look at the profile of the person that tweeted it, or we can search for tweets around this date. We also have entire web pages, and this is a selfless promotion by me. That is my website. But you can see, it's made it mobile. This is kind of how it would look if you open it on a cell phone. And if, for example, we want this in another screen, we can right-click and open frame in new tab. And if we do that and we go, you can see that that's now the full website. So again, I don't know how much use websites would have in crime analysis, but in intelligence analysis, when we're looking at companies that might be shell companies or something like that, it's nice to have the web page and show like this is where it looks a little faulty, or this is where the web page says this, whatever. So next up, PDF documents. So everything before that we've looked at were all cloud-based stuff. Those media content were perfectly suited for the timeline tool as it stands right now, right? The stuff developed by Northwestern University. But what about PDF documents or Excel spreadsheets or surveillance video and stuff like that? We can't really put to the cloud. PDF documents might be things like email, or maybe it's cell site records that we get from a phone company, or bank statements that we get from a bank. It can really be anything, any type of document. Well, now the tool that I developed allows you to save that file and then embed it into your timeline without ever having to save that to the cloud anywhere. And looking at this, you can see like that's pretty small. Nobody wants to read that. But we can right click and say open frame in new tab. And because the tool actually writes HTML around your PDF, so essentially it builds a quote-unquote website, if you will, that displays nothing but a PDF. You can see up here that it's pulling from like a local domain. It's not actually being hosted by the internet anywhere, except in this instance it is, since my example is saved in the cloud. But if this was your local machine, it wouldn't. And so we have that. Additionally, we can view surveillance videos. Now here you'll see nothing actually shows up. That's because Safari does not do very well with what's called WebM videos, which is what I have in my cloud-based example. So we can't see it, but this is actually a surveillance video that's embedded into the timeline with full playback capabilities and everything else. So in Firefox and Chrome, this works seamlessly. And if you pull open this example in Firefox or Chrome, you'll actually see the video there by navigating to this tab. So we also have Excel files, which once you upload the Excel file to the tool, it converts it to an HTML table, which is then decorated with like every other row being color coded and with the highlighting of the row with jQuery. Now again, this is pretty small, so a couple things we can do. One, I said we can right click and open frame in the new tab. We can also, and this is kind of the point of the tool, let's edit this event instead. So we scroll down and we choose the Excel files and everything populates. I want to get rid of the text field, so I'm just going to enter null. And then I edit the event and everything updates. So I then go over to the other tab, I select, and I'd like to jump back to that event and then hide the controls. And so here now it's much bigger. It now holds all of the fields. We can see everything. We can scroll down, go to the next page, and we have all of our data there. The other way, of course, like I said, was to right-click and view it in a new tab. But I wanted to show this because if we get rid of the text field that we see in all of our other slides, so this here, if we get rid of that, the timeline is smart enough to just move our headline up top and put the immediate content down at the bottom and make it bigger so that becomes the focus of our timeline. And so the last thing to talk about is images. Of course, those are equally important, whether it be a mugshot or maybe some pictures that one of your undercovers took, or maybe anything else that you might find. Images are also easily embedded, and the timeline tool is smart enough to determine whether or not that image is a local file that you're asking it to load or an internet file that it needs to go and get. So how to use the tool, everything's point and click. Our controls are kind of the main thing to deal with here, so we can edit the title, add an event, edit an event, other. And then once everything is done, we can save the timeline or load a timeline and kind of do that. So let's go ahead and go back to the beginning. And let's actually just go to the title. So let's see how this all works. Let's say I want to edit the title and now say this is so we're going to change these two fields, the headline and the text. And when we update the title, we see that it changes on the fly. All the changes are immediately implemented, and we're good to go. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that just by changing that, we haven't actually changed the real timeline, right? So if I refresh the page, one of the things that's nice is the app will tell you that there are unsaved changes. It doesn't say it in those exact words, but it says, are you sure you want to leave the page? You may lose your data. We're okay with that. We're going to leave the page. This was implemented so that you, if you're building a tool and you accidentally refresh the page or accidentally try to close the tab, it'll stop that and say, hey, like there's unsaved changes. Are you sure you want to leave? So we're going to go ahead and leave. And what that means is it's going to reload the timeline. And we now are back to what we had before. Now, say for example, something's not rendering correctly. Like if we skip through really fast, and we get to PDF documents and for some reason this isn't showing up, or I've seen it where like it'll spill outside of the box where it's not supposed to be. And we just want to kind of say, hey, timeline, like realign yourself. This is the refresh button that we want to use. And all that does is just re-render the timeline. So say, for example, we do edit our timeline and it's not quite rendering the way that we wanted. We refresh, and unlike refreshing the page, refreshing the timeline using this button maintains our changes that we've made. So let's look at some other stuff. If we go to Google Maps, let's actually go to the PDF document because this is going to be one of the things that are of biggest interest is, how do I use this tool to embed my local files? So if we go to Show Controls and edit the event, editing an event is set up so that when you choose an event, it will actually pre-populate all of your fields with the values that are already in there. So it populates the headline, the text, we have our start date, and our media URL. Now, here, there's some extra values there, right? We have the iframe and the source. This is kind of the quote-unquote hack I implemented to get around the timeline's inability to embed these types of documents. So like I said, the tool itself writes HTML around your file and allows that to be embedded. So in reality, let's say you wanted to embed this my file. First, let's go ahead and make it null so that it gets rid of it. And then we go back. And a real quick aside, whenever you edit an event, it'll re-render, and so it always re-renders at the title slide. Unfortunately, I can't fix that. That's just kind of a necessary evil, if you will, the way Shiny works, the way R works. So you'll just jump back to the event, and now our media is gone, right? So let's add that back in. So we choose to edit. So here, our media URL, we're actually just going to say myfile.pdf, and that should give us because our file needs to be saved in that files folder, and we don't say what folder it's in. Shiny already knows. We just give it the name of the file that we want to actually load. So when we edit the event, and then now jump back, it's now there. So the reason I wanted to show this was for local files, you just give the name of the file. And then if we go back, of course, it will come back as this, which is different from the media URL that we gave, but this is the media URL that gets passed to the actual timeline. One of the things I might fix is so that this will be populated with the actual value that gets passed to, that gets pre-populated, so it's the actual value that you would have entered. So one thing to note, though, is that your file names cannot have spaces in them. You'll want to replace any spaces in your file name with an underscore. That's just for the sake of like URLs that get passed into like the iframe source. Like there just can't be any spaces. So you'll want to make sure that you use underscores instead. So let's hide controls and go and look at something else. You know, Excel files, if we edit this event and go to the Excel files, you know, we see that the iframe source is there as well, and you know, excel.html, but it was actually excel.xlsx, I believe. So yeah, it'll take XLS, XLSX, and CSV files, and it knows what to do with all of those. Let's go ahead and jump back to Twitter. Oh wait, let's jump to Twitter first before we edit it. And so let's say that we want to add a caption, just a little short little snippet. So we add a little caption and we edit the event. And another thing we can do is we can click an event down in the bottom and it'll jump to it. And now we have this little caption that's underneath, right? Say you can also click and drag this if you want to go to your event. And so like, let's go to images and just edit event. You know, and so maybe you've got a mugshot and you want to put the person's name under there or something. So then we just jump and there it is. So that's how you edit events. Really anything that you want to put in can be put in there. So let's go back to what is the tool, jump to event, and then edit the event and what is the tool. So let's say, for example, you don't necessarily know what all of these things are. I've put little help buttons next to each. So the first thing that'll come up is like that first line is a description of what it is. So headline, this is just the title for your event slide. And then at the bottom, it'll tell you if that's required or not. And so the headline is not required, but it is highly recommended. Text, again, we saw earlier, not required. The start dates. Dates are a bit tricky. So dates must be in a format like this. So it must be a 4-digit year hyphen 2-digit month hyphen 2-digit day, followed by your hours, minutes, and seconds in military time, so in a 24-hour time period. So this will be 11 a.m., whereas if we wanted 11 p.m., we would just change that to 23. This is actually set up to work with the typical time formats that law enforcement uses. Also, only the year is required, so this would be perfectly valid. But anything that you append then goes left to right. So, for example, if you want to add the day, you have to add the month first. So that'd be left to right. Like you can't say, oh, I want the first day of 2015. That won't work. So you add the month and then the day, but you could just add the year and the month. That's valid. This is valid. Um, you can add just the hour, but for most people, this is going to be a fully fledged timestamp with the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minute, and the second. Um, for times when it wouldn't include the seconds, that might be like world events that take place, what have you. End date is if your event spans a period of time. So, say for example, you had a robbery and you're not entirely sure of the exact time frame, but you know that it happened anywhere between 0600 and 0800. You could do your start date as 0600 and your end date as 0800, and the header down here would span the actual time of that event. Um, End date has to be formatted the same as start date, and if you do an end date, the format should be the same. So if you do the year and the month, you'll want that included in the end date as well. Again, I hypothesize that most people will just be using the fully fledged timestamp anyway. Media URL, that is how we add either internet-based or locally based files. Um, so this is what kind of differentiates this timeline from any other timeline. Instead of just being points on a map down here, it actually gives us the media content that brings our timelines to life, if you will. Caption, as we saw, is just a little statement that goes underneath the media content, and you'll see in the tooltip that it's not required and is only used if the media content is present. So if, for example, we try to put this in and we edit the event, it'll say the caption field is only used when uploading media content. This field will be ignored. So the caption field doesn't actually get changed. And apparently the timeline just timed out on me again. The cloud-based one is a bit finicky. Yours will not do this. It's much more stable when running in R. It's just the cloud-based server I'm using loses connection up every once in a while, apparently. So we'll just restart, not a problem. And everything's back up. So again, still just going through some of the different things. Credit, if you have an image that maybe somebody else took or whatever else, and you want to give credit to it, it doesn't even necessarily have to be for that. It's going to show up in the bottom right of the media content, and the caption shows up in the bottom left. So maybe bottom left, if it's a mugshot, that's the person's name, and the bottom right is the date that that mugshot was taken, or what they were brought in on, or whatever else. You can kind of use it for whatever you want, but the media caption will show up in the bottom left. Media credit will show up in the bottom right. Media thumbnail is what these things are. So like the YouTube symbol, the Twitter symbol, the Google Map symbol. If you wanted to add a thumbnail, like here we don't have one, but we could maybe go to the internet and get a little image of like a little yellow duck and put that in there. And actually, let's do that. Let's like a little yellow duck icon. This one will be fine. To view image, it's going to show up like that. That's all right though. But if we copy that and go back here and paste that in and edit the event. Oh, good call. We want to edit the first event. That's starting to become annoying. The reason I'm doing it in the cloud-based instead of in the tool that we loaded is because I have all of the events already loaded on here, and so it's just easier to show different things as opposed to building one from scratch, but we will go to that in a second. But if we go here and edit the event, it did not show up. That is interesting. Maybe that image is too big. Let's see. It's reading it. Let's try a different one. Maybe it's the fact that this one is a stock image and doesn't like to be used. So let's just, we can copy the link. Let's just view image, Control C, go back and paste that in. Oh, none of them are showing up. All right, I'll look into that. But essentially what should show up is a little image like what you have here. Definitely not required, probably not even necessary. The more content that you load onto your tool, the slower it'll be to load and navigate. So I would recommend not putting it in there. I put it in there for completeness because the original, the timeline developed by Northwestern University had it, and I thought that it was worth keeping in. Background doesn't work, and that's not my tool's fault. Whatever's going on with the timeline tool, you're supposed to be able to pass like a hexadecimal color, so something like that for white or that for black or anything in between. It's not registering. It's supposed to change the background color. Again, not important. I wouldn't recommend doing it anyway. But groups are exactly what they sound like, groups of events that maybe you want to put together. And so if we edit the event, we now see that G1 is a label in our time bar, in our timeline navigation, and this is the only tool that falls into there. Everything else gets pushed down into this non-grouped category down here. So groups are a great way if you have different events that you want to label in certain ways, but it really is only for the benefit of kind of grouping the events down here. So that's up to you if that's something worthwhile. In my line of work, when we're reading a bunch of emails, we can use the groups as a type of tag. So these emails are about sanction evasion. These emails are about bulk cash smuggling across borders, those kinds of things. So it works for us. If you have use cases, I'd love to hear it. And so those are the controls. What you'll notice is that the title has the exact same, except no thumbnail. And that's because it doesn't get one of these boxes down here, so the thumbnail would be useless. But that's how you edit your timeline. If you wanted to add a new event, we go ahead and just say, we can just quickly add. And let's put this somewhere in between. So let's see, we have 11:22 and 11:34, so let's just put this at 11:30 in the morning. And we will add the event. And you can see it puts it in between our two events automatically. So even though this event was added afterward, it knows where to put it here. And if we go to edit the event, it has inserted it as the second event. So it doesn't append it down here at the bottom as the new event. It is embedded right where it needs to be. And we can go in and, it pulls up all the same information that we would need. So that's how you add an event. That's how you edit an event. Editing the title is just like editing the event. Another thing we might want to do is say, okay, we actually don't want this event, so let's just delete that. Interesting. Oh yeah, I made some changes that didn't get pushed to the cloud. So let's actually exit out of this and go to this one. So here, let's add our new event, and again, some text. And here we're not going to add time, so that we can see that like just a day is good, so we'll add the event. And here, an example event and a new event both have the same timestamp. So 2015, January 1st, so they go in the exact same spot. New event is put under an example event because it was added second. So the timeline will first check if they're different days or times, and if so, then like it'll put it where it needs to be. But if it matches the date and time of another event, if it was added second, it'll put it underneath the other event. So uh, let's say now we actually don't need our example event anymore, because if we go and look at that, hide controls, we see, this is an example event. You should delete this from your timeline. So we choose an example event and we delete it. And it tells us an example has been deleted. Okay. And so now we only have our one event. So we've now seen, how do I edit my title? How do I add an event? How do I edit an event? How do I delete an event? And those are kind of the main controls you need. So now let's say I'm happy with my timeline. I'd like to save it. So we're going to go ahead and click Save Timeline. And we see down here that our little document chooser has popped up. So this is asking us, where would you like to save? So I'm going to save this in a completely different location here. And let's see. Interesting, this does not work as well for Mac, because in Windows what you'll see is that you'll have a little box down here where you can type in a name. I, however, do not, so my file would have had to have already existed. So let's see, what if we right click? Interesting. So, okay, I'm sorry about that. For you, down here you'll have a little box, and you should just name it something. Call it timeline.html. You have to add the .html, and that's because you want it saved. Like the timeline itself, even outside of the tool, is a web-based content, a web-based document. Now, I don't use web-based in terms of meaning like it's going to connect to the internet. I just mean that like your browser has to be the one that opens it up. So save it as a .html and then click Open. And it'll say like, this file does not exist. Would you like to create it? And go ahead and just say yes. And so then that'll happen. And so then you'll come back here and you'll get a pop-up box that says your timeline has been saved. So once you close the application, everything will be moved. So we are going to go back into Brian, and let's see. Here, let's actually do this. So CD. So, well, no, let's actually just go into, I'm good here. Let's touch timeline.html. Okay. So we're going to make a timeline file and try this again. So if we save, comes up down here. So I'm going to choose my timeline.html, which is, it's just a blank file, and click Open. And here it says timeline saved. All files and folders will be copied to the appropriate directory once you close your browser. Okay. So closing means either actually closing it or refreshing the page using Control R is considered the same thing. And so now, if I go to my Finder, which isn't opening up, we will now see that if I open this up, it will be my timeline. So we open that up, and you can see we're no longer in the tool. None of the controls are up here. There's nothing over here, and the site notation is gone off the bottom. So it's just the timeline, and all of my events are in here. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that you'll see it moved the www folder over. So the important CSS files are in there. If I had uploaded any media content, then all of that would be in here as well. And the JavaScript files that we need are pulled over as well. So at this point, right, say that your timeline is done and you're ready to show your captain or the lieutenant or anybody else that you need to show this to. You have to actually send them this .html file and the www folder. That's very, very important. So these two files need to be sent together, because otherwise, if you try to open this and all of your media content, it won't be able to find it in the www folder. Also, you shouldn't move files around in here. So everything is saved, Timeline knows where to look for it, but if you start moving it around, it won't be able to find it. So a couple key things to keep in mind with that. Now, say for example, because we're back at our example event, this is exactly what the timeline looks like when we launch it. I want to load the timeline I was working on before. And so we come back in here, and I'm going to choose this timeline and come back here. And we can see that it has now loaded the timeline, and I can continue working. So let's say new event 2 and some more text. But on the next day, and we will add our event. We'll hide the controls. And see here, you can see not everything lined up quite nicely. We could have just refreshed here, but it looks like it corrected itself. So everything loads, it goes over. There's new event 2. Now, what's nice is when I click Save Timeline, it just tells me it's been saved. Because I loaded the timeline, it already knew where my file was. I didn't have to go and select it again. So it will only ask you where to save the file one time per timeline. So if you're working on a timeline and you load a new one, it won't ask you where to save it. It's just going to save it back in the old location. Now that does have its con. If you wanted to save it as a new file, that's not possible. So it is going to save it back to its old location. In those instances, maybe you load the timeline and then go back into your file directory, move the old file out, and then just save this one. It'll save back to that place, and you can just rename it there. A little bit of a workaround, but unfortunately, it's the most seamless way to do this. So it'll save, and of course, we can close out of this by just refreshing. And if we load our timeline again, and go back, we've got new event and new event 2. So everything's good there. I do not have a bulk events spreadsheet made up to show you, but let's say that you have 15 events that you want to load. Adding an event and typing in all of those details, for each event is a bit tedious. So instead, if you have a spreadsheet with all of these columns, so if we go to edit event, not event index, but everything from headline down to group must be included, must be its own column in your spreadsheet. And it needs to be all lowercase, and anything with a hyphen needs to be, or anything with a space needs to be with an underscore instead. And anything with media, just don't include the word media. So it'll be URL, caption, credit, thumbnail. Let's say you don't necessarily you don't remember that. When you try to upload your events, if the headlines, like if the column names aren't right, it generates a message that tells you what those column names should be. So at this point, we've now gone over kind of everything that we would need to go over. We know how to put files into the timeline, whether those be local files or internet files. One thing I do want to show you is how easy it is. So if we just go to Google Maps and type in Times Square, we now get our URL and that's all that we need to plug in. So let's go ahead and add an event. The start date is the only thing on an event that's required. So let's make sure that we put that in there. And then for the URL, we go ahead and just copy that whole URL and add the event. Hide the controls, let everything kind of catch up. And where did our map go? Let's try to refresh. Apparently it wasn't showing up. There we go. So that's a good example. Like you say, okay, my event's supposed to be in there. It's not rendering properly. Just use this refresh button and we get it to show up. And there it is. So it's the same thing with YouTube and Twitter and all of these other kind of cloud-based services. The timeline knows how to detect those URLs and determine what they are, and it will automatically do the embedding for you. So you just have to kind of grab those URLs and pass them in. For local files, as I mentioned before, PDF and Excel, whatever, you just have to save it in your files folder and don't reference any folder name. You just pass the file name with no spaces. They need to be underscores to the URL field, and everything will generate. So hopefully you guys have a better grasp in terms of how to set everything up and how to install the tool and get it going. As always, though, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. They come directly to my phone, and I'm more than happy to answer questions as they come in. So good luck with the tool. Hopefully it gets used quite a bit and proves to be as beneficial as I'm pretending it will be. But until then, take care. Thanks for using the tool.